Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 297 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Go and check out our second book on Amazon. It's called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. It is a great book. Go check it out today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, there is so much support in our fraternity and sorority community where everybody is looking to help everyone else. A prime example is our next guest, who was so gracious to take photos and video for me when I was speaking at Southern Methodist University. And our speakers were also happy to help out at NGLA for the lectorials on race that the Parallel Agency was hosting last year. And ultimately, we're all in this thing together. And it's so great that we can all support each other to ensure that the fraternal movement is successful. Our next guest is one of my favorite humans around. It's Nicki Rowlett, born and raised in Michigan, but has lived in 5 different states since graduating college. Nicki earned a bachelor's degree in communication studies, event management, and leadership from Central Michigan University, and a master's degree in student affairs from Ball State. She is a member of Delta Phi Epsilon and has worked professionally with fraternities and sororities for 8 years. Nicki is an author, seasoned facilitator, and a longtime volunteer within the fraternal industry. Her focus is on identity development, inclusive language use, bias, allyship, and the impact of privilege, power, and position. She enjoys developing strategies, infusing concepts of DEI into existing programs, and coaching others to make informed and intentional decisions. She's also the managing director and lead strategist of the Parallel Agency, a full-service consulting firm specializing in organizational culture and belonging. Welcome to the show, Nicki.
Hey, thank you. Oh my gosh, you read my bio as I was sitting here. I was like, I'm sweating. I feel like someone's singing me happy birthday at a restaurant.
Nicki, you are the best. Honestly, like, everybody on our team absolutely adores you. I think you already know that. What can I say? I mean, you're just a pleasure to be around. I mean, every time you're around, you make me smile, you make me happy. And at the end of the day, like, people remember how you make them feel. I mean,
100%.
that is just the God's honest truth. And every time I'm around you, I feel good. I mean, that's it. I mean,
I appreciate that.
it's just straightforward and it's so easy. And so I love that. And so let's go way back. Let's talk about one of my favorite campuses, which is Central Michigan University, where you ended up for your undergraduate experience. And I'm sure our audience wants to know, why did you choose Central Michigan? Fire up, Chips.
Go fire up. So this is actually a really funny story. When I was a senior in high school, my boyfriend at the time went to Central Michigan. So I went to go visit him over Halloween weekend. I had a great time. I loved the football game. I loved my weekend adventure. And I said, well, I'm going to be with Brandon Karen for forever. So I guess I might as well go to CMU. And I applied for Central. I applied to Central. I applied to Michigan State. And unfortunately, I didn't get into Michigan State. And when I did not get into Michigan State, my mom then told me that she went to CMU and that I should be really excited for my acceptance letter from Central. And she was like pumping me up and gassing me up. And I got accepted to Central. So I went because my mom went there, but I also went because my boyfriend, who I thought I was going to be in love with for forever, was there. Let's be honest, we broke up like a month after school started. So I was stuck with this decision for the next 5 years, but it was a good one. So I feel like people are always like, oh yeah, I went to the interview days. I just fell in love, or, you know, my orientation leader was so cool. Not my case. Like, my boyfriend went there. I was 17 years old. I made a 17-year-old decision, and that's how I got there.
But you know, it all worked out, and obviously I knew that it didn't work out with this boyfriend. So I'm like, all right, that guy is gone in like 30
He is.
days.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes. Shout out to my soon-to-be husband, who is not my 17-year-old boyfriend, but is so great and amazing in every way.
Oh my God, he's one of the most amazing humans. And so, yes, you're absolutely right on that. You ended up winning in that deal. Everything worked out just fine.
Yeah.
So, what's interesting is you joined Delta Phi Epsilon, which I happen to love, love, love their initiatives from their headquarters. But on a chapter level, what was so special about the women of DPhi at Central Michigan?
So you're asking me all these questions where people are probably like, oh my gosh, was this pivotal? No. Um, so my mom had actually encouraged me to go through the sorority recruitment process. And she said, hey, you can make more friends like this. So you should sign up for this thing. And I was like, cool, can I have the $35 then? She gave it to me. So I signed up for this recruitment process, and I wasn't really vibing throughout the process. Like, I just kind of was there to be there and to say, okay, I did this. But honestly, I just kind of looked at it as like another club. I was the potential new member that showed up late. I was the potential new member that was in like leggings and a tie-dye t-shirt with a nice little baseball hat. I was the person that showed up to preference night in all black, a black nice dress, because I thought that that would be really nice, except for all the chapters were wearing black dresses. So that was a little weird for me. People thought I was active, but yeah, I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'll do this like ranked preference thing. And on the way over to the computer lab was a 15-minute walk. And I met my now maid of honor in my wedding, Elena, and she also went to DPhi. And I said, oh, I'm vibing with you and I think you're cool. So what chapter are you joining? And she said DPhi. And I said, okay, cool. I'll pick that one too. And I did. So I made this amazing and awesome friend on the way to preference. And had I not met her, I don't think I would have picked Delta Phi Epsilon. I think I just would have randomly selected. Maybe I would have been an Alpha Gam or a Phi Mu. Shout out to those two chapters. I don't know, but I think it was, mostly because of her. And then I just, decided that on a whim. And about 2 weeks into the process, I had to make a decision. Do I want to continue with this new member process? Or do I want to keep doing the dance team that I was on? I couldn't do both. It was too much of a commitment. So I flipped a coin, and tails was DPhi, and that's why I stayed. So I just stayed involved and did all these things. And it's so funny when people ask me, because, they're like, what about the values alignment? What about the people? And I was like, yeah, as an 18-year-old, like those things didn't really matter to me. I just really vibed with Elena, and I wanted to pick something, and tails landed on tails. And that's how I got to DPhi. And it's so wild because 15 years later, I think to myself, I could not have been in a more perfect organization for myself.
Yeah.
I could not have chosen a more perfect alignment for me in so many different ways. So when people say like things happen for a reason, I kind of go like, meh, whatever you say. But I really do think that happened for a reason. And my undergrad experience was great. And my graduate experience was great. And now as an alumni, it's been awesome. So I love when people say great things about DPhi, because we have awesome staff and awesome leadership. And I'm just excited to be part of that.
Yeah, you nailed it on the organization. I mean, obviously, Elena had a lot to do with it, but when I think about you as a human and what you stand for, of course you're DPhi. Like, where else would you be?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, it makes
100%.
total sense to me now. I'm like, of course he's DPhi. Like, of course. But it was Elena, and I think that ultimately proves my point, and really why I ask these questions is because I want the undergrads to realize what fired up kind of coins, which is that people join people. I mean,
Mhm.
you joined that organization because of Elena. Period. Full stop. That
Yep.
is the only reason. Yes,
100%.
later on you grew to appreciate the organization and the leadership, which is amazing. But at the end of the day, it was Elena, and that's really what I want the undergrads to focus on. Focus in on those relationships, because that's ultimately what makes people join organizations. It's not the big event. You didn't join DPhi
Mhm.
because they put on some big event. You didn't care. It was Elena you wanted to hang out with. Period. Full stop.
Right. Right. And so I saw this post the other day, and it was a senior, and she had posted a picture of her when she first joined Alpha Z Delta, and then she had posted a picture of her at her recent graduation. And she wrote this like long passage about how, like, when I joined Alpha Z Delta, I had no idea what I was doing. It wasn't my first choice. It wasn't my second choice. It was my third choice. And I saw all these people around me and they were so happy and excited. And I was just like there to be there. And throughout my college experience, I grew to love Alpha Zeta Delta more than I ever thought that I could. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to take this post and like literally put it on a t-shirt, because I think there's so many people that go through specifically the formal recruitment process in Panhellenic, and maybe they don't get their first choice, so they don't get their second choice, or they just randomly choose one like me. And then they end up where they end up. And for some people that works out, and for some people it doesn't. But I just really think that the narrative around like how people join and normalizing some of those things is super, super vital. So I'm super glad that you asked.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that I asked too, because that definitely helps me and helps our audience too. Talk to us a little bit about your higher ed journey. Talk to us about maybe some of the differences in working for some college campuses versus some fraternity headquarters, for example.
Yeah. So I had a 10-year career in higher ed before I transitioned out in November. And now I work full time for a Fortune 20 company in the DE&I space, specifically in campus recruiting. But in my higher ed career, I learned one, so much about myself and so much about my skill set. But two, I learned a lot about what I wanted in a work environment, what I didn't want. And I think there's this notion, especially in higher ed, that like work is life and life is work. And I learned a lot about how to separate those two things through all the experiences that I had that were not so sexy, if that makes sense. And working on a campus, I loved the work that I did. I loved interacting with other people. I loved planning the events and the programs and facilitating all of the pieces. But I didn't like advising. I didn't like advising. One, I felt like it was draining. Two, it's not my strong suit, and I know that about myself. And I think a lot of times in higher ed, it's really difficult for higher ed practitioners to like have their come to Jesus a la Buddha higher power moment and be like, I maybe not am the best at this, or like I maybe am here for a weird reason. And about 5 years in, I noticed that I was in the space because I was really good at doing some things and I could perform well and I liked the environment. But a lot of the stuff working on a college campus, I didn't like to do. Like I didn't like advising. I didn't like the long nights. I didn't like the administrative stuff. Like there's just a lot of pieces that I didn't like. So then I moved to headquarters and I thought that my life was going to be drastically changed and different. I worked for two different fraternities. And I was one of two women on staff for both fraternities. And that taught me, one, a lot about different environments for how people operate and are structured. But two, I think the biggest thing that I learned about myself was advocacy. Like, how do I advocate for myself? In higher ed, we spend a lot of time advocating for students and advocating for student needs and resources and all of these things. But I never really know how to advocate for myself. And when you're on a staff with a bunch of men and the dress code is a suit and tie and you don't wear a suit and tie, like you have to be able to say, well, what is the expectation for me? And sometimes in a room full of men, that's awkward. Or if you're at a board meeting and people are talking about, relationships with the fraternity and sororities on campus, and you're the only member of a sorority in the space, and people look to you like, talk on behalf of all sorority women. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Right. So I think advocating for yourself and also being comfortable in your own self was really something that I learned, especially for working for both of the fraternities. And I think, as I was contemplating, what do I want to do with the rest of my career? I knew that I wanted to be involved in parallel, and we'll talk about that later, folks. But I knew I wanted to be involved in parallel. It was really a staple in my life, and it had been for almost a year at the time that I decided to transition. And I wanted to prioritize that in a way that made sense to me, and I didn't want there to be competing priorities in higher ed. So I left. And I said, I want to do something different. And I put myself out there and I job searched for like 6 months. I mean, that ish was hard. Like to get another job, especially outside of higher ed, it was hard. Like when I left my first job at Millikan, I got recruited to come to Purdue. When I left Purdue, I got recruited to come to Delta Chi. When I left Delta Chi, I got recruited to come to Triangle. And nobody was recruiting me to leave higher ed. Like I had to find my own job. I had to do my own thing. And about 600 applications later and 6 months later, I found another job. So I am super thankful for my time in higher ed. It taught me a lot. I met a lot of great people. And I got to interact with a lot of great people. But ultimately, it was not my ride or die life passion choice. And I think it took me a long time to to understand that and to get to that. And it was hard. But I think I'm in a much better place now. So I'm grateful for my experience, and I really loved all the people that I met, and it got me to where I am. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think you and I are alike in a lot of different ways. I mean, I was never really working for higher ed. I am now, but in the past, it was more the corporate space. And then I really didn't like the values that I was seeing out of leadership in the corporate space. And that just made me feel really just icky. And then I decided, okay, there's this fraternity thing that's kind of in the background. Let me go and work for the headquarters, did that, but then realized that there's all these problems and I can't just be focused on my one organization. Like these problems are so much bigger than any
Yeah.
organization. And if I
Mhm.
really wanted to make an impact, it was about kind of designing what that consulting firm was going to look like. And so I think you and I really came at it from very similar spaces, to create kind of this vision of what it should look like, if our company and our brand is going to align with who we are as people.
Mhm.
And so it's so great to meet here, at this space. But let's talk about it. I mean, you became the founder and lead strategist for the Parallel Agency, and there are plenty of full service consulting firms and agencies in our market. Talk to our audience a little bit about how you came together as a team and what makes Parallel Agency different from everybody else who's out there.
Yeah, I love it. So I always tell people I'm a self-taught community-made entrepreneur, because I would not have been able to do this without the help and assistance of like some really key pivotal folks. And I think, when I first started talking about topics around equity and access and belonging and privilege and power in the fraternal industry in 2013, it was seen as divisive. It was seen as divisive. It was not accepted. I mean, we submitted programs to conferences and they requested conference session titles to be changed. Some sessions didn't get approved at all. And, I think one, being consistent in that space and recognizing that there's a large gap area was the first thing. I think we talk a big game when it comes to aligning words with actions in fraternity and sorority, specifically around things like equity and inclusion and belonging, but we're not necessarily willing to change anything that messes with our traditions, which is virtually 80% of things that exist.
Mhm.
And, I was in a space where I was like, we need to continue to move this conversation forward. We need to continue to do this work in a way that makes meaning for people, because DE&I is not just about, topics or definitions or things that we see. Like, these are real people's lived experiences. And as fraternity and sorority members, like, we should care about that stuff. So in 2014, 2015, 2016, I started to dabble in what would it look like if I did this with another agency. Started to dabble in things that currently existed, both within the higher ed landscape and outside of the higher ed landscape. And outside of the higher ed landscape, they said, you should really try to find something in higher ed. That's where all your experience is. And I said, okay, thank you for your time. And all the things that I looked at inside of higher ed, it was either you don't have any full-time speaking training experience, like you're not a trained speaker, essentially, so we can't help you. Two, you don't have any footage. So even if I have seen you present at a conference before, I don't know any of those things. And the third thing, which really just grinded my gears, was that these topics are divisive. And we're in the for-profit space and we're here to make money. And no one's going to bring you to campus to talk to members of historically white sororities about power and privilege. And when I got the no the third time, I was like, okay, so I'm upset, I'm frustrated, and I just feel like it just kept going like this. And one of my friends, shout out to Tyler Manning, I'm sure he'll watch this because that's just who he is.
Yeah.
But he said, Nikki, why don't you just create your own thing? Why don't you just do your own thing? Like, you're waiting for permission for everybody else. And this was at a time where I was like really down about my higher ed career. I just left a job that was not a good match for me. And he said, like, Nikki, you're trying to find belonging in everything else. Like, why don't you just create it for yourself? And I was like, hot damn, why don't I do that? So I did. And me and Bridget Wynn and Jessica Ryan started having some intentional conversation about work that we had done at conferences, specifically the NPC Educational Annual Meeting and AFA. And then we just got to a space where we were like, hey, why don't we try to like incorporate something? So I Google how to start an LLC, right? Because someone's like, hey, we need an EIN number from you to do work with you. And I'm like, what's the EIN number? Right? I don't know any of these things. I'm so lost. And we were just in a space where we were like, okay, this is our chance to do something and to do something in a way that makes sense for us. And I think, one of the things I really want people to know as you're listening to this is that our team is made up of people who have always been second guessed, background people, and been told no for a lot of things. Whether it's you can't work with that specific community, or you're not good enough to be on the speaking roster, or you're not good enough to do any of these things, or you don't have footage, or you don't have all this stuff, right? And our team is made up of just badass women who are committed to doing the work. And I think that's the coolest thing, is that we've created something that I think people have latched onto, that people have aligned with, and it has grown bigger than anything I ever thought. So 2.5 years later, we're in this space now where we're partnering with conferences, where we're working with campuses and organizations and local chapters and all of these things. And it has just morphed into like this beautiful entity that we really believe just closes a gap. And that's ultimately what we wanted, right? We wanted something that was intentional, that was accurate, that would help to serve a market, and that would close the gap. And I think we've really done that in some really cool ways. So I'm so proud of our team. I'm so proud of Parallel. And I want to give myself a pat on the back too. I feel like I don't do that enough, but like I'm proud of myself because running a business, as you know, is not easy.
It's not easy.
And
It is just not.
it's
I'm sure
very
you and I
hard.
can compare notes. It is hard. There are days when you are
Hard.
just like, what am I doing right now?
It's
Like,
so
why?
hard.
I must be a masochist or something to want to do this.
Yeah. And I think, I was thinking about like about a year and a half ago, I was like, I can't do all of this by myself. So kudos to you because I was like, I just can't.
Yeah.
But two, I was like, again, I had to come to this pivotal moment to be like, Nicki, here are the things that you're good at in this bucket, and here are the things that you are not good at. And if you do not lean on other people to help to support this business, you are going to falter. And that's when Lashate just came, wings on, coming down like an angel. Like she just came. And I was like, literally, she is everything I'm not. She has great skill set in areas I don't. So I was literally like itching in my seat to wait to announce our joint ownership of the agency because it's just been pivotal for us. And I just feel like we are on in a new leaf, in a new era for big business energy, as we called it. So I'm super excited for that. So I definitely want to give her a shout out too. She's been super pivotal in the agency, and there is no way we would be where we are without her.
Yeah, she's amazing. And certainly I can point to our organization and say the same things. I mean, Greek University isn't where it's at without some amazing, amazing humans who care so deeply about fraternity and sorority. And they can point out all the things that I can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And I depend on them. I lean on them so hard to show me what I can't see.
Yep.
And they do a great job of it. And I think we're stronger because of it. And so, super proud also, of what we've built, but more so, what you guys have built. I think it's just outstanding in a short amount of time. Just like you said, partnering with conferences and just doing amazing work in such a short amount of time. I think it's a phenomenal success story. So kudos to you and the rest of the team. All the respect in the
Oh,
world.
I appreciate that.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. And you have these 5 core principles that kind of guide all of the work that you do at Parallel. The first one is balancing learning with unlearning. So, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so we get questions about this a lot. I think a lot of times in the diversity, equity, belonging space, we see a lot of here's a workshop that I created to help you learn something new. And I think that that's great. That can work in a lot of ways. But I think also specifically, and we're narrowly focused on fraternity and sorority. So we are only, our market is members of fraternities and sororities and people who support those organizations. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves, like power and privilege run rampant in fraternity and sorority across the gamut. And there's a lot of things organizationally and personally that we need to unlearn as well as learn if we're going to move this needle. So it's one thing to be like, hey, I'm going to learn, different types of biases that might exist in the world. It's another thing to unlearn the decisions that I make as a result of those biases and unlearn the tics or things that come up for me when I'm starting to make decisions that may be rooted in bias. So we focus a lot on learning. I would say we're probably about 60-40, maybe maybe 35, 65 actually. We will focus on the learning piece. We'll introduce concepts to people, but I think what makes us really unique is one, our ability to be practical with our audience. The narrower you are, the more practical that you can be. And two, is we also focus on unlearning. So what should you do, but what should you not do? And how can you unlearn some of the behaviors or things that happen as a result of microaggressions, dominant culture, assimilation, bias, etc. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because one, we do get a lot of questions about those. And I think the number one reason why people come to us is the principles that we have. You know, they see us deliver an ed session, or they come to like a virtual session that we host. We do those like monthly-ish. And people will come and they'll be like, this was just so different than anything I've ever been to. And the reason is because we're focusing on unlearning. We're focusing on how do you unlearn problematic behavior. How do you unlearn things around complex issues that you've been socialized to like know and understand? And particularly for a lot of people in historically white sororities and fraternities who are also identify as people who are white, it's like, how do I unlearn what I learned growing up and then what I was taught in my organization? And I think, you know, a lot of the times we don't want to call out things for our organizations in a way that's like problematic or harmful or could be seen as bad, because we love them, right? Like our bestest friends, our bestest memories come from fraternity and sorority. So how can something that's been so great also be so damaging and problematic? And I think we sit in that middle space a lot in a way that resonates with a lot of people. And unlearning is something we focus on a lot. I also think it's just important in general, like in life, to focus on unlearning some things that maybe you think you know. And we spend a lot of time doing that, I think, in a way that really resonates.
You know, it's so interesting that you talk about this unlearning concept. I think it's fascinating, and it is what makes you different. Um, I was talking to an executive at Google yesterday, and we were just kind of talking and just chatting and talking about the fraternity and sorority industry. And you know, as an outsider, he's aware of like Bama Rush and some of the stuff that we see on social media. And he was like, Mike, if I get up in front of a stage of fraternity and sorority leaders and I ask them to raise their hand if they are in favor of DEI initiatives, 100% of the students are probably going to raise their hand or close to it. But yet, we have this Bama Rush thing, which is clearly rewarding things that is
Problematic.
not accessible to most people. So, you know what I mean? So what do we do with that?
Yeah. It's fascinating to me. And I think, a lot of times people focus on like, well, I think something might be problematic, but I don't understand why. Or this seems to me, but I don't understand why. And I think like Bama Rush is a great example. So yes, there could be inaccessibility. There could be pieces surrounding like power and privilege in relation to status and money and all of those pieces. And I agree with that 100%. But I think one thing that I really think about in terms of Bama Rush is like assimilation. And when we talk about equity and inclusion, we ask people to assimilate. And Bama Rush and the OOTD stuff, like that is prime example of assimilation. And when we say, come as your best self, we want you to be authentic. One, authenticity is a privilege, folks. And not everybody in the world has the privilege to be authentic in every space that they're in. And two, we are inadvertently forcing people to assimilate to culture. And what impact does that have on exclusion? People might feel like they're a part of a group, but do they feel included as their true self? And I think unpacking some of those things in a way that's like what I like to call backdoor language. We've got the front door where we pull that baby open and we come on in, right? And I'm like, okay, we're talking about oppression, we're talking about racism, we're talking about all of these pieces. But the backdoor word choice that we use to get people in the back door can sometimes be just as impactful. Another one of our pillars is the mode is just as important as the message. And hear me loud and clear. I'm not saying that we need to whitewash stuff, but if we can talk to people in a way and meet them where they are, I think that we can begin to discuss things in a way that resonates with people. Because at the end of the day, if you can't make meaning of this work for yourself, it doesn't matter to you. Like you can talk about definitions and concepts all day long, but if you can't put it into practice and it doesn't make meaning for you, then it's just another tool in your toolkit. as opposed to like the way in which you live life.
hmm I'm seeing a lot more of this new position being created in historically white fraternities, historically white councils,
Mhm.
which is this DEI chair position. And many of these students, they come to me looking for advice. They don't even know where to start. So, what do you recommend to somebody who gets put into this DEI chair position for their chapter or for their council? What should they be working on?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So we actually developed a program last year because we saw so many national organizations that were doing this, and we had an influx of people coming to us. So I think the first thing, one, if you're someone who works for a national organization or you have pull in that volunteer space, being really intentional with what you're asking the students to do and how you're asking them to do it. Because people are getting position descriptions with 2, 3, 4 bullet points that are well intended, but not well informed. So when we try to position students as experts on things that they maybe don't know anything about, or their own lived experience in a way that could be traumatizing or trivializing, is not our intention, right? It's not what we want to do. But I think a lot of people just felt so much social pressure to create these positions because we didn't have anything before and now we need to move the needle. So let's create this new role. So the first thing that I would say is, if you're a new DE&I chair, the first thing you should be doing is figuring out what things belong in your bucket and what position responsibilities related to representation and equity and access belong in other people's buckets, because shared responsibility for this work is really, really vital. I've seen too many national organizations that are siloing the work, and more specifically, siloing the work under a position that's maybe education or member development or something. So one, think about how you can broaden your scope. Two, if you are not in a leadership team, executive board role where you have direct decision-making power to do things, you need to get there in some way, shape, or form. And again, I'm talking to my IHQ folks specifically. Like they can do that in a way that makes sense. I think sometimes in chapters they can, sometimes in chapters they can't, but figure out how you have direct access to decision making. Too often, I think we see DE&I chairs that have to go through 5 different yeses before things happen. And in other positions, that would not be the case. Not even in like risk management. That's just not the case. So I think being mindful about that. And then a third thing that I would say, which we tell students all the time, is don't position yourself as the expert. Even if you are super passionate about something, or you're really interested in a topic, or you think that, you know, you could deliver a really great like workshop or session for your members on that, that's awesome and great. But don't ever feel like you need to position yourself as the expert, because DEI expertise is not a thing. It's just not a thing, right? We can't be an expert in other people's lived experiences. And as people who work with student leaders, we shouldn't be putting them in spaces to position them as the expert, right? So I think recognizing what is your role, what are you uniquely positioned to do, is super vital. Other tidbits or tags that I'd give is make sure you have a budget, and I'm not talking about $200. Your budget should be reflective of the work that you're doing. Make sure you have a long-term plan that stems over multiple semesters and not just while you're in the role. Because if you don't focus on systemic and sustainable change, your efforts are only ever going to be as effective as you are. And when you're out of that role, they will no longer be effective. So I think being mindful about the correlation between what you do as a person and then what you do in the role is super, super vital. But we got a ton of resources on our website, so you can visit that, www.bparallel.co. Drop the M, it's not a com. Sorry, someone already had that. So weird.co. But yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of things to do, but ultimately, biggest piece of advice is prioritize yourself. You know, we're 100, 150, 180 years behind the gamut, and we have been living and breathing in organizations that are oppressive and discriminatory and exclusive in nature for years. So you're not going to undo that in your semester term, and you're not going to undo that in your 4 years either. So I think being realistic about what you can do and always take the small wins.
Wow, that's great advice. I really like that a lot. You know, I speak to college fraternity and sorority members all the time, and I think I talk about privilege a lot too, because I mean, let's face it. I mean, we are privileged to be at this institution of higher learning. to be in a fraternity or sorority, which obviously there's a lot of money that goes into all of those decisions. So, why is it important for us to be able to discuss privilege within fraternities and sororities? Because sometimes when we do, all of a sudden it leads to a bunch of misunderstandings or
Mhm.
just being very defensive so quickly.
Yeah. So I think privilege has been coined a term that is divisive in a lot of ways. And particularly when we talk about the term white privilege, has become this narrative of you didn't earn what you have. And that's all people hear is you're telling me I didn't earn what I have. I didn't work hard. It's all of the things I didn't do as opposed to what I did do. And I think trying to find ways so that people can make meaning of this is really, really important. So as we talk about things like power and privilege, we do so in a way that has people reflect on like what their own personal experience is. So like one of the questions I typically use in a session is like, so your neighbor just bought an expensive car. How much did it cost? And sometimes people are like, 100K, they'll shout out from the audience, 100K, 50K. And inevitably, someone will always say, $8,000, $10,000. And I just sit there for 10 seconds and I let it happen, even if it's quiet. And I talk about this notion of how we're socialized and how we're brought up to know and understand the world is indicative of how we see things. So if you would have asked me that question when I was 18 years old, I would have said 50K because my parents drove leased vehicles. They got a brand new car every 2 years. So a $25,000, $30,000 car was not expensive to me. And what type of privilege do I have as a result to know that? Right. So like this notion of like, how do I think about how it shows up in my own life as opposed to someone being like, you're privileged. So people don't respond well to that, right? And it's again, all they're hearing is you're telling me I didn't earn what I have, or you're telling me that, I didn't work hard for these things. So I think finding ways so that people can again figure out what it means for themselves, right? Like people have to make meaning of this work for themselves in a way that is not performative and in a way that's not transactional. And I think a lot of times when we talk about topics that can be seen as divisive, like power and privilege, there's like this notion of, well, I don't know how to navigate that, like as a speaker. And I would always say, like, I put that on the learner to say, how are you reflecting on how you know that, right? How do I know, or what makes me think that $50,000 is a lot for a car? And thinking about some of those things from that lens has been really successful for me and for the rest of our team. But ultimately, like people got to make meaning of the work for themselves, and we got to do so in a way that people resonate with, right? We got to find the balance of push and pull, but also challenge in a way that makes sense.
Love it. Absolutely love it. One of the questions that comes up every now and then, especially in the fraternity and sorority community, is how can college students be better allies? What
Mhm.
answers do you have for them?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, I think recognizing that allyship is a verb and it's not a title. That's the first thing, right? And I think if you are looking for that title or that relationship or that reckoning or understanding, we have to know that that's a verb, right? It's something that you choose to do or you choose not to do. So that would be the first one, is to and make sure that you're framing it in the way that makes the most sense. It's not a noun, it's not a name, it's a verb. I think the second thing, and a lot of things about what we talk about in relation to allyship, advocacy, and accomplice or accompliceness. Thinking about the difference between those things. A lot of times I've been in sessions where people are like, this is how you be an ally. And I just don't believe that's a thing, right? I believe that there are certain ways and spaces that people can make meaning of that for themselves, but there are also different levels to allyship and advocacy in a way that would make sense for you based upon your personality, how you see the world, how you live and breathe in it, et cetera, et cetera. So me, I'm boisterous. I'm outgoing. I'm not afraid to ask people questions. I'm not afraid to challenge things. So my allyship may look different than, let's say, Jessica on our team, who may not be as boisterous or loud. Her allyship may look different. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would give is you have to put parameters on what it looks like for you in a way that is mutually beneficial. And that's the biggest part. Too often I feel like I hear members of historically white fraternities and sororities say like, well, we want to be allies to the culturally based organizations on our campus. Well, who does that benefit? Them or you? Because if you're trying to just be an ally to Black students, students of color, because you think it's the right thing to do, are you doing that to benefit yourself and your organization, or is what you're doing benefiting them? And I think a lot of times we center ourselves in allyship in a way that is not helpful, but also sometimes we don't realize that we're doing it. So I would say it has to be mutually beneficial in a way where you feel good and genuine about doing it. And the people or person who you are giving allyship to, they feel like that is genuine and good, but it's also helpful to them, right? There's a lot, and specifically, there is a lot of white people who are well-intended and not well-informed. And that's not across the board, right? You can be well-intended and well-informed one day, but not the next. And sometimes we can do more harm than good because we don't focus on allyship with the person as the center. We focus on ourselves because we want to be known as the inclusive leader. We want to be known as the ally. So that would be my biggest piece. And I think particularly if you're a fraternity or sorority student, thinking about how that shows up in your own chapter and then across governing councils is definitely something to consider.
I love your perspective. I think it's just so great. And so thank you for sharing all of that. Now, you know that I love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And every once in a while, I do get to Irving, Texas, where I can maybe visit you and Adam. So when that happens, I want to know which restaurant we need to go to in order to get a great meal in town.
Lucky's Hot Chicken. Lucky's Hot Chicken. It's my favorite place. I was like, ooh, I hope he asks me about food. Because Lucky's is amazing. Adam introduced me to it about, oh my gosh, it's been almost a year now. And he went there randomly for lunch and came home, was like, I had the best chicken ever. I was like, okay, prove it. So he took me to this place. Done. Over. Best chicken ever. Lucky's Hot Chicken is right by Southern Methodist University's campus. It's the oldest Black-owned business in the center of Dallas. We've been there countless times, probably 30, maybe more. They have great macaroni and cheese. And if you eat inside, they have soft serve ice cream for free.
What?
So we normally eat inside, but I would definitely 100% wholehearted recommend Lucky's. And no, I do not do any sort of advertising for them or get any kickbacks, but I would go with you 100%.
All right, Lucky's Hot Chicken. I mean, listen, you're talking to a Nashville guy,
Yeah, I was just
and
gonna
you're
say
talking
that.
about
Yep.
hot chicken.
Yep.
So I'm
It is
there,
solid.
immediately. So we'll see. All right. So next time I'm at SMU, you better believe we're going to be doing some Lucky's Hot Chicken. That
Yes.
sounds fantastic. And free
I love
ice
that.
cream. I mean,
I
I'll
know.
twist my arm. Free ice
Yeah.
cream.
It's Adam's favorite part.
Yeah, it would be my favorite part too. I totally get it. All right. So, if our student listeners who have listened to this conversation with you, I know they had a blast. If they want to learn more about the Parallel Agency and all the amazing people you have on your team to help them, where should they go?
Yeah, so I would say definitely go to our website. Shout out to our new business manager, Jane. She did that for us. It looks great. Again, www.bparallel.co, drop the M, not the com, or else you're going to get some marketing agency that's not us. So you are looking for the bright blue. If you get the bright blue, you're in the right place. You can also find us on Instagram at b.parallel. Again, you're going to see that bright blue color. I would say probably about 80% of the partners that we work with, they DM us on Instagram, and that's how we get connected. So don't be afraid to DM us on Instagram, give us a quick follow. And the third place you can find us is LinkedIn. So we recently created a LinkedIn to help connect with our partners who are alumni advisors, volunteers, and folks that work professionally with fraternity and sorority. So you can also check us out on there.
I love it. Bparallel.co, drop the M. You don't need that, and just find the bright blue. That's it. Once you find the bright blue, you're in. Nicki, you are the best. Like I said, we are all huge fans of you and the entire team at Parallel. So thank you so much for what you do for the industry. We're huge fans. Whatever you need from us, just call and we will immediately drop whatever we're doing, and we are going to help you and your team. I can't say enough good things, and you should be patting yourself on the back. You know, you're just like me. Like I don't even for a second pat myself on the back. I just charge forward. I'm like, I'm all about the mission. and I'm all about the team. But I think you and I have to stop every once in a while and look around and go, this looks pretty good.
Yep.
And just pat ourselves on the back because man, oh man, I mean, it is not easy. The path that you and I have chosen is not one that most people would travel
Yeah.
because it's a lot of work. It's hard. It's frustrating. There are nights that you are literally just at wit's end going, what in the world am I doing? This is really, really difficult. But we do it because we care
Yeah.
about the fraternity and sorority community. And so that's where we meet.
Yes. 100%. And I would be remiss if I did not say, like, I feel like I don't do that enough. And La Chate is so good about being like, Nikki, small win.
Yeah.
Nikki, big win. So I think just, surrounding yourself with people who care and who are there to support you is amazing. Like I'll be honest, Mike, like not everybody was as forthcoming as you. Not everybody was willing to help in the way that you were willing to help. And I think, being in community and recognizing that, there's plenty of seats at the table for everybody to eat. And there's plenty of ways for us to contribute to the industry at large. Like that's meaningful, especially from someone who's like, yeah, we got this little team, we're doing this little thing. And not everyone was as welcoming and as willing to do that as you were. So I appreciate that. And I just want to put that into this space because I think it's important that people know that. I think integrity in business is everything. And I
I'm with
appreciate
you.
you for having that.
Yeah, listen, it's my pleasure. I agree with you. I come from this abundance mindset. I think that there's so much business out there for everybody. I think, if we focus on particular areas and we have great people, then great things are going to happen. And I don't even worry about that. I don't even think about that for a second. It's all about helping others achieve whatever it is that their mission is. And there's so much business out there. There's so much. Believe me when I tell you that there's so much business out there. So yeah, it doesn't bother me for a second. And you know what? I just like working with good people that are kind of, the same values as me. I mean,
Same. Yeah.
that's really what I want to do. I want to surround myself with people that make me feel good, that have good values, and want to move the fraternity and sorority community forward. If you have
Right.
those three things, you're with me. Tell me
Right.
what you need. I'll give you whatever you want.
100%. Yep. 100%. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, listen, this has been so much fun. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I know everybody's going to be listening. So thank you. And thank you so much to our listeners. And if you like this talk with Nikki, please, please, please like it. Please share it on social media. And we will see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.